Have you ever stopped to think about the journey your t-shirt took to get to you? Or maybe the shrimp in your freezer? We're all connected by this invisible web of global trade, but that connection can be surprisingly fragile. Today, we're going to pull on one of those threads and see how a trade dispute between the US and India sent shockwaves from factory floors in Asia all the way to the global energy market.
And look, this isn't just some philosophical question. It's the reality right at the heart of this trade standoff. But to really get what's going on, we first need to get one key term straight.
Okay, so we're going to be talking a lot about tariffs. Put simply, a tariff is just a tax. The best way to think about it is like a border entry fee that a country charges for goods coming in from somewhere else. The idea is usually to protect your local businesses by making imports more expensive. But, as we're about to see, it is rarely that simple. So, first question, why India? What was the deal here? Well, to understand the US perspective, we have to look at a complaint that had been simmering for a long time.
The U.S. viewpoint was pretty much summed up by then-President Donald Trump, who called India a tariff king. And look, this wasn't some new idea. For years, the U.S. had been arguing that India's own high import duties were making it incredibly difficult for American companies to sell their stuff in India's massive market.
Now, the key thing to get here is that these tariffs weren't about just one thing. Not at all. It was this whole cocktail of economic and geopolitical pressure. On one hand, it was direct retaliation for India's own tariffs. But it was also a response to India buying huge amounts of discounted oil from Russia. You throw in some reported diplomatic friction and the ongoing goal of reducing the trade deficit, and well, you've got yourself a perfect storm.
And the response was severe. I mean really severe. An initial tariff at 25% was announced. That was already painful. But Indian industries felt like they could probably survive it. But then, just a month later, that tax was doubled to a staggering 50%. This was a huge signal that this wasn't just some routine trade tweak. No, this was a major economic battle.
So what happens when a 50% fee gets slapped on your country's key exports, seemingly overnight? Well, the impact isn't just felt in some fancy boardroom. It hits the ground and it hits hard, affecting real people.
This number is it's hard to even wrap your head around. It's 135,000. In the Indian system, that's 1.35 lakh. And that's not the total number of people who lost their jobs. That's how many people were reportedly laid off in just one industrial city, Surat. A massive, devastating blow to a single community. It really shows you how concentrated the pain can be.
So, where do these tariffs hit the hardest? Well, they landed a direct hit on several key sectors. Textiles and garments, the source of that t-shirt we talked about, took the biggest blow. But other major employers like gems and jewelry, seafood, and leather, they were all deeply affected.
And behind all these statistics and charts, there are real people with real fears. This quote from a garment worker in Tirupur, which is a huge textile hub, just captures the anxiety that spread like wildfire through these communities. I mean, imagine if your entire town is built around an industry that suddenly can't compete. That fear is everywhere.
To see exactly how this works on the ground, just look at the shrimp industry. It's a perfect example. Indian shrimp, a massive export, gets hit with that 50% tariff. Meanwhile, their main competitor, Ecuador, only faces a 15% tariff. So, if you're an American buyer choosing between the two, the decision is pretty simple, right? The Indian product suddenly became, as one exporter put it, super expensive, basically handing the entire market over to their competition.
And the damage, it doesn't just stop at the factory gate. When thousands of people lose their jobs or get their hours cut, they stop spending money. And that means fewer lunch orders from the local food vendors, less work for delivery drivers, and declining sales for all the local shopkeepers. The entire local economy just starts to shrink.
But this story is even bigger than textiles and shrimp. This whole tariff dispute is tangled up in a much larger geopolitical game, especially when you start looking at global energy markets. All right, here's the fact that might seem like a total paradox. India imports about 90% of its crude oil. But, get this, it's the world's second largest exporter of refined fuels like gasoline. How is that even possible? Well, it's because India has built this massive refining industry that buys raw crude oil on the global market, processes it, and then sells the finished products for a profit. This makes India a really crucial player in the world's energy supply chain.
And this is where that Russian oil comes into the picture. Just look at this dramatic shift. It's wild. Back before 2022, Russia was a tiny source of India's crude oil, like 2%. But after sanctions made Russian oil available at a huge discount, India's imports just skyrocketed.
From an economic perspective, it was a brilliant move for India's refiners, but it became a major point of tension with the United States.
And this brings us to the really high-stakes gamble. The European Union, a huge market for Indian fuels, has now banned imports of refined products if they're made from Russian crude. That puts an estimated $15 billion of Indian exports at risk. So now India is caught between this cheap energy source on one side and the risk of losing one of its biggest customers on the other.
So we end where we began, with that tangled web of global trade. This whole story just shows how a single tool, like a tariff, can have these incredibly complex, unpredictable consequences. It can impact everything from one single worker's job all the way to the flow of energy around the entire planet. And it leaves us with a really critical question. In our interconnected world, do economic weapons like these ultimately drive nations apart, or do they force them to find new and sometimes unexpected ways to connect?